Hey Eagle fans, it's EaglefanKarl. This is going to be my prediction video for the 2020 season as I look forward and try and figure out exactly where I think the Eagles are going to finish up this year and whether or not we're going to make a return trip to the playoffs for the fourth straight year. So let's go ahead and take a look at the schedule. First things first, I think the schedule looks pretty fair. The bye comes in the middle of the season, so I think that's always a good thing, that it's not too early or too late. If I had one gripe, it's just the fact that there's a lot more away games scheduled for the back end of the schedule than the front end, which based on what I was talking about the other day with fans being allowed at the stadium versus not, well, if later on in the season they make a determination that fans are allowed to come to the game, then we'll have missed the bulk of our home schedule if, say, halfway through the season they say fans are allowed to come. So that's really a sort of a bummer in that respect, that we could potentially lose out on that if fans at some point are allowed to come back. The fact that there's so many away games scheduled for the second half of the season. But the way I'm looking at this season, I really sort of break it down in a couple different increments. Usually I try and look at games in sort of the four quarters of the season, but that really doesn't work this year just because of the way sort of some of the games are clumped. I think the season actually starts off fairly well, so I'm going to start us off with 3 straight wins. I think all those games are winnable, but that's probably the easiest stretch we have, and unfortunately it does come at the beginning of the year, which is when I think teams that are more cohesive from past years will have an easier time of things. In other words, teams with the same coach, same schemes, same quarterback, all that kind of stuff. I think if those teams are going to be probably a lot more successful early in the year versus the back end of the year, once those teams have finally started to be able to maybe figure some things out, since they haven't had the extensive off-season training like they have in years past. So I think that's going to favor teams like ours that have the same coach and quarterback and system. That's, I think, really going to help those kind of teams. Well, for us, that doesn't really help that much because the first 3 games, I think, are very winnable. Even without that in a normal scenario, they would have been very winnable games. So I think we start off with 3 wins. It's the next 3 games where I think we hit our first rough patch, and I actually have us down then for 3 straight losses. And that's when, of course, all the Eagles fans will probably start, freaking out and all that kind of stuff when they lose 3 straight. I do think that there's a possibility we could always pull off a win in there somewhere that I don't. There's always one of those games that you win that maybe you don't expect to, and that could certainly come during this stretch. But for now, I think that those games just don't set up well for us, and as a result, I think are losses. The one question mark I really have in that is Pittsburgh. I think the Steelers could be really good, or they could be sort of mediocre. That one's probably the hardest one of those games to pick. We then enter a phase where we've got a bunch of division games. We've got 3 straight division games over 4 weeks with the bye mixed in there. I think we go 2-1 because we're at home in these games. I think we do split with both the Cowboys and the Giants this year. I think the Giants probably are going to be a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and give us a split with the Giants, and I think we win the first game against Dallas at home. So that's where I have us, after that stretch. Then there's sort of this one-off game against Cleveland, which I think should be a relatively easy win as well. Then we enter another tough stretch of games where I could actually foresee us losing all 3 of these games, but I'm going to go ahead and say that we go 1-2 over these games. And once again, this is one of the ones where I think we probably pull out a win that maybe we don't expect. Just for sake of just putting it up on that schedule there, I'm going to go ahead and say that win comes against New Orleans. But I could easily see it coming in a revenge game against Seattle as well. So I think either one of those possible games is probably where we pull out a win. I don't see us going to Green Bay 2 straight years and winning. So I'm going to go ahead and pick us going 1-2 over that stretch. That, of course, puts us at 7-6 over the first 13 games of the season with the final stretch run. And that's where it's going to get problematic. I think given all those scenarios, I think we are able to go out to Arizona and get a win. Then the 16th game will probably be for the division, and I don't see us beating Dallas twice. I had us winning earlier at home, so I'm going to say that unfortunately we're going to go down to Dallas and lose. the way I actually calculated out Dallas's schedule, I think that clinches the division for them. I think the way it would have worked, the way it works out, is that going into that game, we would need to win the last two, and Dallas would need to lose the last two for us to win the division. But I'm going to go ahead and say that Dallas clinches the division in that game. And then for the final game of the season, I think we're still playing for a potential playoff spot at 8-7, so that we go ahead and we beat the Washington football team to close out the year. So where does that put us for the season? Well, like I said, I went through all of the schedules for the division, and that's the prediction I have for the division standings. I know it hurts to say it, but I just don't think. I think for the reasons I said earlier, with on the video I made the other day about the injuries to the offensive line, I'm really worried about that. I think our secondary is better, but I'm worried about the lack of a pass rush we're going to have, and you just can't get away with that in the NFL of not having a pass rush. I know Jim Schwartz does not like to blitz either. So if quarterbacks aren't under pressure, I think we're going to have a hard time in those kind of situations being able to stop teams. So as a result, I've got us going 9-7. I've got Dallas at 11-5. Then the Giants and Washington, of course, at the bottom of the division. So I basically see things very similar to last year. And I think that's going to be a theme across the NFL this year. I think teams, like I said, that are starting with new coaches, new schemes, new quarterbacks, I think they're going to struggle more than other ones just because of the lack of an off-season workout and routines that they didn't have. So those teams, I think, are going to be sort of at a disadvantage going into this season. So let's go ahead and take a look at the NFL as a whole and make some predictions for where I think teams are going to end up as far as the playoffs and not making it. I looked at my predictions for last year, and of the 12 teams I predicted to make the playoffs, I went 6 for 12, so 50%. So take this all with a grain of salt. I'm basically a coin flip on some of my predictions here last year. But like I said, I'm going to favor teams that probably are going to be playoff teams from last year that I think will be able to get back there this year just because of some of the continuity. The one exception, of course, I'm making on that is Dallas. I think Dallas just has a lot of weapons, and I just think there's too many question marks on our team. So I've got the Cowboys, obviously, then winning the NFC East. In the North, I like a return trip from the Packers. In the South is an interesting division. It's sort of the return of, I should say, the battle of the geriatric quarterbacks in that division. You've got Drew Brees and Tom Brady going up against each other. Those teams, I think, are clearly the two best teams in that division. But I'm going to give it to the Saints just because of the continuity, like I was talking about. So I think the Saints win the NFC South, and in the West, I'm going to go ahead and say the Seahawks are going to actually pull out that division this year. The 49ers, I don't think are going to be able to go back and do what they did last year and have that same sort of success. I do think, though, that the 49ers should be able to make a wild card. And just because I think the Eagles do get to 9-7, I'm going to say the Eagles go ahead and get in and squeak in as the last wild card as well. So those are my predictions for the NFC. Let's go ahead and then take a look at the AFC. And first things first, that of course jump out at you is the fact that the AFC East does not have Tom Brady in it anymore. So that actually makes that division worthwhile thinking about and who's going to win it. I like the Bills to pull off the AFC East. So I like their defense. I think they do enough on offense to win. I think that division is going to be lousy. So I think the Bills will be able to win that division. For the North, I like a return, like I said, of teams that have had success last year. I'm going to go ahead and say I think the Ravens pull it off again this year. So I've got the Ravens winning the North. The South is where I do have a little bit of a switch up. I don't think the Texans are going to return this year, but the Titans, who made the playoffs last year as a wild card, I do like them to win the division. So I'm going to go ahead and say the Titans in the AFC South. And then, of course, in the West, there's no way I'm picking against the Super Bowl champs. I think they've got things figured out way too much in a division that is very vulnerable. So I'm going to go ahead and take the Chiefs in the AFC West as well. For the two wildcard slots, like I said, the one team I've really struggled with about what they're going to be this year is the Steelers. But I think they do enough to get in as a wild card. I think playing against our division is going to be helpful. And I think if I remember correctly, they also play against the AFC East. So I think that's going to give them a relatively easy schedule to be able to get there. And then the other one, I'm going to go ahead and flip the Texans and Titans. So I say the Titans win the division and the Texans will be the wild card this year. So that's my prediction for playoff spots in the AFC. So there you go. There's my prediction. Like I said, I'm not as high on the Eagles as maybe some Eagles fans would be. I just have way too many concerns about our offensive line and our defensive line. And that's where you win games. You win games in the trenches. And that's when we won our Super Bowl. That's where we were strong. And I just don't see it this year. So that's where I have concerns. And as a result of that, I have us being sort of a mediocre 9-7, maybe sneak into the playoffs with that kind of a record. But that's sort of where I am right now. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Are you a lot higher on the Eagles? Are you worse? Do you think we're going to bottom out this year? Let me know in the comments below what you think. I'll go ahead and check in next week before our opener against Washington. Until then, fly Eagles fly.